Welcome everyone to one of my favorite sessions of the conference, and this is the Euclid Waterfront Innovative Lakefront Development for All. This will be a 1-hour session, and if you do have questions that come up, please put them in the Q&A, and we will be able to filter those either at the end of the presentation or during the breakout session, and we'll be sending you out some links about that. I did want to also mention that this is being recorded, and we're excited to have those recordings on the iHeartTrails.org website, as well as on the Rails to Trails Conservancy YouTube site. Second thing I wanted to remind everyone of is that there are CEUs provided for this session, and it's important that you fill out the evaluation of the session if you want to qualify for those CEUs. And we do have some information in the chat about that, as well as we'll have that link for the session survey. And we do want all of our attendees to fill out that session survey to tell us what you liked and how we can continue to improve. And the last thing I wanted to, again, emphasize is that we will have a 30-minute session, a breakout session right after this, where our presenters will be in various breakout rooms, and you'll have an opportunity to chat with them directly. So let me tell you about our speakers, and we're really excited to have the champions behind the Euclid Waterfront project, and that includes, first of all, we've got Mayor Kirsten Gale, the mayor of Euclid, and good friend, and has been an amazing ambassador for this project. We also have Allison Lucasy Love. And Allison is the director of the Department of Planning and Development for the City of Euclid. And of course, we've also got to have in the mix Jason Stanglin, who is the Waterfront Practice Director of the Smith Group. And so with that, I think I've covered all the details that I need to cover. So again, I want to thank everyone, remind you to fill out the session survey, and to also join those breakout groups. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Euclid Waterfront team.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kirsten Gale. I have the great honor to serve as the mayor of the City of Euclid. And let me first start by thanking the Greater Cleveland Trails and Greenway Conference, the Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition, and the Rails and Trails Conservancy for putting this event together, but also thank you especially for recognizing this project in your showcase on Monday with the Platinum Award. We are extremely appreciative of that award and the recognition, especially given the other really transformative projects that were showcased there. So we really appreciate that, and thank you so much. This project has been a long time in the making, decades to some, multiple, depending on who you talk to, 10 years or 50 years in the making. Euclid, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the first suburb of Cleveland along Lake Erie. We are the third largest suburb of Cleveland. And we've experienced a lot of change over the years. I've lived here all my life. I had the great privilege to grow up right on the lake. My parents still live on the lake. So I grew up with the lake in my backyard and access to that all the time. For many of the community, that wasn't the case. We have the great fortune to live, be a community on the lake, but many couldn't get down and enjoy it in the same way that I could. So for years, the city's been looking at what can we do, how can we really build on what is our greatest asset, and that's Lake Erie, and really are thrilled with this project. It's taken a lot of work by many. You'll hear some of that today, but with all good projects, it takes a lot of partners, it takes a lot of hard work. It took, dividing it into multiple steps, and most importantly, it took really engaging and involving the residents and the stakeholders in the process. So you see in front of you a picture of the waterfront project. These are there we go. And Steve Litt, who's a plain dealer reporter, wrote this quote. Euclid, this was back in 2017, just as we were getting to launch the trail project. We were getting close to realizing a brilliant lakefront project that could serve as a precedent for Cleveland, if not the entire Great Lakes region. We're really proud to say that we have realized that dream. And so it's really been a project that has transformed our community, but also you will hear is really providing a model for others. So we're really thrilled about that and thrilled to be able to share some of that with you today. The presenters today, I'm going to keep my remarks brief, and you're going to get to hear from the two people who really were so instrumental in making this happen. Allison Lucas-Love is our Director of Planning and Development for the City of Euclid, and Jason Stanglin, who is the Principal Landscape Architect and Waterfront Project Director for Smith Group. Smith Group has been with us since 2009, and they were selected from many other consultants because of a couple of things. Their projects that they planned actually came to fruition. So we asked them, when they presented all their plans, well, how many of these were actually built? And they looked at us kind of funny and said, well, all of them. That's what we do. We plan so that we can actually do it. And they do that through a couple of reasons. They work with the permitting agencies, they work with the stakeholders and the funders through the whole process. And so I think that's really been a piece of our success. And we thank Jason and his team for all their hard work and really the diligence to get us to rocks in the water, as so many people said. So with most plans, it started with a vision, and it started with really identifying some key goals that really led us through the whole process. And those you see on the screen in front of you, enhancing public access to our region's greatest natural resource. And again, Euclid is a community that is right on Lake Erie. We wanted to really open up that access. We were experiencing, our residents in our city property, we were experiencing tremendous erosion, and property was washing away. So one of the goals, again, was to address shoreline erosion and to protect the property along the lakefront. Certainly, we wanted to enhance the health of the lake and the health of its users. We have another wastewater treatment, water reclamation facility right on the lake. We wanted to make sure that the water is clean and that we were doing everything we can to increase the health of the lake through this project as well. And again, we see the lake as our greatest asset, and Euclid as a city that had seen some disinvestment and seen people moving out, industry moving out. What can we do to make Euclid unique and attract people back? So we really wanted to use that, the lakefront and this access to leverage our city and the growth, bring about the growth of our city. And then also we saw it as an opportunity to generate economic development and spur new investments, which we are seeing today. So I don't know how many of you are familiar. If you have a chance, raise your hand in the chat box. If these are some social media posts about the project, we broke you'll hear more about the details, but we broke the project into multiple phases. So we are under construction with our second phase of the trail, but we started with a pier. And people have been down enjoying it. And so while it's not 100% complete, it is being actively used. People are down there every day in enjoying the waterfront, enjoying the community coming together, not only from our community, but from Northeast Ohio. So hopefully you are familiar with it. If you are not, we are at Lakeshore Boulevard in 228. We are hosting a walk shop later this afternoon. So as many plans are, you get excited when you see the plans on paper. I will say this is one plan that the actual physical project blew the plans out of the water. I think it was it is so much better than any of us expected. And we just are so excited to continue the progress and continue to build on this success. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison to get into the more detailed part of the presentation, but look forward to being here to answer questions and share any other comments that would be helpful. So Allison.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. And for those of you who have signed up for the tour this afternoon, the walk shop that the Mayor mentioned, you'll get a double dose of both myself, Jason, and the Mayor, and hopefully the rain holds out this afternoon. So thanks for those who were able to let us know your familiarity with the project, recognizing that we're speaking both to a group of people who are from the larger Cleveland region and those who are well outside of it as part of this Rails to Trails conference. We thought it would be prudent to give you a little bit of scene setting here. So here's where we are within the Great Lakes Basin. We are solidly within the Lake Erie watershed. And one of the things that we feel very strongly about here at the City of Euclid, and I know is also very important to Smith Group, of course, is understanding that before we plan, before we put any pen to paper, we really needed to understand the place. So that went all the way down to the neighborhood and community level of understanding what our residents' desires were, both those directly on the lakefront, but of course, and probably more importantly, throughout the community of about 50,000 residents that we have here in Euclid, but also, where we sit in this larger watershed and the region. And now that we started from there, we drilled down, we worked on this 3/4 mile project, which is the longest project that ODNR has permitted in terms of waterfront infrastructure. But now it's really exciting because this quote unquote Euclid model is now being looked at as a solution for across the Great Lakes. So we started at a really large scale of the entire Great Lakes Basin, drilled down here to Euclid, Ohio, and now that model is again being replicated or looking to be replicated elsewhere. So again, just sort of a cursory overview of what is the state of the Great Lakes shoreline. It's different everywhere you go. The geology is different. Here in Euclid, we have a lot of sandy soils, and we have bluffs that are experiencing erosion that is not atypical to what our neighbors all around Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes are also experiencing. We have over time seen people try to improve their properties through different types of infrastructure, whether it's a seawall or some people really trying to put in boat slips and public access or private access rather. And it's a piecemeal solution to what really is a systemic problem and something that we believe our project really has a solution for. So again, some of the recommended by the Coastal Management Office at ODNR, as well as the Army Corps, different types of uses you could put along your shoreline to protect it. A sand beach is something that the community, when we started talking about this, the mayor mentioned we've been under contract with Smith Group since 2009. Absolutely, sand beaches were something that were historically here in Euclid. You'll see that in a couple of slides, and definitely something that the community wanted back. Fortunately, that is also an approved revetment type of measure. A sort of soft natural shoreline is known to reduce the impact of erosion, but you can only do that in sort of larger swaths of area. You can't just install a sand beach over a pretty typical Euclid-sized 50-foot linear lot. It's going to wash away the way that the beaches historically have. Revetments, a lot of people are putting these in now as part of a temporary shore structure permit that's available if you live in North Ohio along Lake Erie. But as you can see in these photos, it doesn't give you access. So it's a really great way to prevent the loss of property, but it creates a hardened shoreline. Doesn't do incredible amount for habitat and certainly nothing for public access. And then seawalls, you're not getting close to the water, right? So if one of the goals of this project was to get people not just to the water to view it, but to actually get in and touch the water and be able to interact with it through paddle boarding and swimming, a seawall isn't achieving that. So we had to look at what all of the potential solutions were. and in a way came up with a combination of using all of these to really reveal their best of assets and what they could provide to the community, and then put on the layer of public access, which really is what makes this project so remarkable. This, similar to that Steve Litt quote back from late 2017, was an article early on in our project. You can see this is a photo of the shoreline right before the project started. So this was the state of the Euclid shoreline within the project area. It's the pretty typical state of the project, or of the Euclid shoreline, and really the shoreline sort of throughout the county and surrounding counties here in Northeast Ohio. And the model here, and the really impressive part of the project is not the layering of the beach and the seawall and the revetment. It's that last layering of public access, and working with the private property owners who still to this day do own the property along the lakefront, along the 3/4 mile trail that we're building, but through long-term easements. That was the innovative solution and the precedent-setting piece of this. So if you have a chance, maybe we can put in the chat box later. This is a Next City article that really kind of nicely lays out the project and has some good quotes from our residents who have been just champions of this project all the way through. A little bit deeper dive, again, for those of you who are out of town, exactly where on Lake Erie we're talking about when we talk about the Central Basin, Northeast Ohio. We're the first inner ring suburb to the east of Cleveland, Ohio. So the Euclid shoreline, again, to go into a little bit more of this, there's about 6% of our shoreline prior to starting this project that was publicly accessible. And that was primarily accessed through a park called Sims Park, which again, if you're on the tour later this afternoon, that's where we're going to meet. You'll see the sand beaches there. It's really an incredible asset for the community to have. But for a community of nearly 50,000 people, plus the more regional draw, not nearly enough lakefront access. So like many other communities, and not just limited to Northeast Ohio, but really most communities that had initially settled around a source of water, and then over time, and especially in the industrial age, really kind of turned their back to that source of water as a public asset and really privatized it. Here in Euclid, it's primarily privatized by residential, which really gave us a path forward to being able to negotiate these easements, because we didn't have to, although we went through a whole bunch of environmental reviews, as was necessary, we really didn't have to worry too much about, bringing the public to a place of industry, or, any maybe not such great use for the public to be in, or for the waterfront to the project to have been built in. So fortunately, we had residential, and one of the real project drivers you'll see at the top of this photo was really the buy-in from the property managers of 4 large apartment buildings that are within this 3/4 mile project area. That is K&D Company. And really, right from the beginning, back in 2009, they had a vision for enhancing what they called their Harbor Town development, which is going to be and is still on track for the future to develop new housing, starts within the area, within property they own right around the apartment buildings, to enhance their apartments and definitely provide access to the lake for their residents who, again, we're very fortunate to have that view from the top levels of the structures of the lake, but couldn't ever get access to it. Still needed to get into their car and drive down to Sims Park or another regional park to access the water, which is really quite crazy when it's just a couple of 100 feet from outside of your door. So the receding shoreline that we mentioned earlier, back in 1949, there already was a way to walk across the Lake Erie shoreline because we had these historic sand beaches. If you were fortunate enough to live on the lake and you had sort of congenial neighbors, you could have taken a stroll along all 4 miles of Euclid shoreline. Certainly wasn't advertised as public access as the community members that I've spoken to, who kind of remember growing up in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s here. But you can see, and in their historical memory, that sand beach was already receding. Less and less every year did they have that amenity. And all the way down to 1968, where not even 20 years later from that top image, it's already gone. And the erosion has just increased ever more so since that time, to the point where these are the existing conditions that we had in the project area prior to starting the work that we did in 2018. So lots of rubble. Some of it has washed up from the shoreline. A lot of it was dumped there, again, with the sort of industrialized greater Cleveland area with I-90, the highway coming through, with streets being torn up. Lake Erie became the dumping ground for a lot of construction debris. And so that's what's sort of been stabilizing some of the properties. One of the things that we really didn't have any clear conception of how large of a problem it was going to be as we got into construction was just how some of the homes even are built on top of this rubble that you're seeing here. It really does go quite far back into the bluff. So there was a lot of excavation of unpermitted fill that had just really built up over time before there were really a lot of controls around this area in terms of what you could put in and out of the lake. And, in terms of also existing conditions, things that we had to work around, of course, those residents who were fortunate enough to be living on the lake for all these years, they had figured out ways to get down to the water. Sometimes it wasn't the safest and the most stable way, but we did have a few instances of private improvements that we had to deal with, such as the stairs you'll see here, and really mostly just bluff conditions that were unstable with a potential to jeopardize not only the homes, but the property values. I mean, this is where in Euclid, as you would expect in most waterfront areas, our most stable and high property values do exist. So we certainly want to secure those, because the only way to really build back the community is to build from a place of strength and ensure that we have that stabilization. You can see some of the material. This was sort of early on in the excavation process. We had already removed some of the rubble from the shoreline, and you just have trees falling and the root ball taking a few feet with it every time there was a major storm, and more so becoming devastating, and not only to the property owners, but also to any aquatic life that at one point in time may have enjoyed those sand beaches and now certainly didn't have a habitat to speak of. So that's one of the things we've been very happy to build back into the project. This is a fun little graphic that was put together just showing you, again, all that rubble fill, the unsafe zone that was towards the near shoreline. And we really needed to get back to a place of laying the bluff back to a 2-to-1, which is what you'll see later on when we show you the project as it is today, so that we don't have the situation of Joe's house falling into the lake, as you see in this render. And fortunately, that has not happened. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason now, who can talk to you a little bit more about shoreline ownership and how that process worked out throughout the project.
Thanks, Allison. I'll start back one or two slides in your memory. I guess when you see the bluffs and you see the erosion in Joe's house, one of the big challenges associated with a lake like this is it fluctuates dramatically. I think we're down 4 from when we started construction, 4 feet when we start construction. And this variability and fluctuation of water level is really important when you're starting to think about shore protection and trail development along it, and what's the offshore depth of water and all those fun things. The fun thing of this one, or the reason I guess I wanted to go back to this slide, Allison, was just that you can see sort of the unmowed turf and you can see the manicured lawn. And there's a difference in ownership here. And what you're seeing here is erosion. And erosion doesn't really care about property lines. And so we're trying to solve things, or what's historically happened is we're trying to solve things on a parcel by parcel basis, and it just doesn't work because Joe's house is actually next door to where this erosion is primarily happening, and in his backyard is what's going to be eaten into if his neighbor doesn't do something. And so that really became a cry for everybody to understand that if we want public access and we want shoreline stabilization, we can't do it alone. And that kind of drove a lot of decision making about things. And there's some other factors. And I guess when we talk about the lake itself and the ownership associated with the lakefront, on that next slide, Allison, the public trust doctrine sort of defines that if you have your feet in the water, roughly, you're on public land, right? And so it's hugely variable by state. It's hugely variable depending on if you're in the Great Lakes or if you're on a coast. East or west. And really what we find is that there's this line, and then a magical line, again, varies by state as to where that defining line is between private and public property. And so understanding that in the state of Ohio is extremely complicated. It's not something that is well defined for a lot of folks. It's been litigated a number of times, and so trying to understand how that influences trail and shore protection along the waterfront was really important to us. So we started looking at what erosion is occurring. And so if you look at that lower right red line over there by Sims Park, and the Sims Park is where that beach exists right there. On the left-hand side of that, if you can see the numbers, it's 374-23. Joe's house is right next to that. And he doesn't own the property to the right on this image. If that neighbor decides there's no reason to protect their shoreline, he pays. And that's not a good situation. That's this idea that we're all part of the same system, right? We're part of property lines don't really matter the same way as they may for other things. So what we started looking at is not only the shoreline ownership of it, but the shoreline recession rates. And so tracking these over history, as Allison, you talked about, in 19 years, that shoreline eroded substantially. And what I think is really interesting about that is that isn't just water level fluctuation. That's actually because we've changed the dynamics of the Great Lakes. We've put out structures and built structures that inhibit the movement of sand. We've protected shorelines which inhibit the movement of sand. All these various things influence that. And so when we're thinking about solutions, we can't just pretend we can go back to a time where we're gonna take out all that infrastructure. It doesn't really work. So how do we respond and adapt? And that's really what we're looking at. And then understanding how ownership plays a part in that is really important. This is sort of that line we were talking about earlier. And so in Ohio, I'll give you a description of it. And there's a joke down at the bottom, which is Jason's version 10.2. To understand this I've been working in Euclid since 2009. It took me at least 4 years. The simplistic perspective is the ordinary high water mark throughout much of the Great Lakes matters. Meaning from a federal regulatory standpoint, the Army Corps' permitting process, that's important. And we have to honor and respect that. That's great. But there's this thing called the Natural Shoreline in Ohio, which is a really interesting line. It essentially goes back to a litigation date in 1989 that defined the boundary between public and private ownership. And I won't go into the case law because frankly, I'm not an attorney and I wouldn't be able to represent it correctly. But the idea is that there is this line that looks as historic, and it basically says, had man otherwise not intervened, not placed all that rubble fill that Allison showed you in a series of pictures, where would that shoreline naturally have eroded to? That's the defining line between public and private property, not where the line is today. The Army Corps says where the line is today, that's fine. But if the natural shoreline were to exist, where can we put those improvements? And so what we're trying to do is have a constant back and forth discussion with regulatory, with landowners, with ourselves about what we can do to put improvements in certain locations. So that natural shoreline really is going to drive a lot of that. And so we'll touch on a little bit more of that in detail here in the next couple of slides. One of the key components of any of these types of projects that we're doing is that consensus and being able to communicate clearly the things we were just talking about: ownership, why it matters to work collaboratively, all those things, creating some common goals, understanding what a public-private partnership can do. In this case, the city was able to fund with some assistance from a variety of grant funds the shore protection in exchange for public access. The landowners paid nothing other than they gave the ability to use the easement and give the easement along the lakefront. So communicating things clearly, listening when we're working on private property for public good. It's really important to make sure we're listening and we're responding, and we're having a lot of individual meetings. So I think there were probably, I can't even count anymore. But you know, Mayor and Allison and I would be at a variety of different meetings, understanding the specific goals and objectives of the residents and how it fit along the shoreline. So we started creating specific goals and objectives by area of the shoreline. And so over on the west side, over by Sims Park, or the left side of this image, we're talking about capture reusing water. So we've got a couple areas where we've got rain gardens built in conjunction with the trail, and we're cleaning that before it comes out into the lake. We're providing access to the cobble and sand beaches. That was important to that group. Over on the east side, maybe by the marina shoreline, which is on the right side there, it's figuring out how we can reuse that debris, crush it, and reuse it as part of the base rather than haul it off, because there's a cost associated with that and environmental impacts with moving that material all over the place. But yet we want to get it out of there because it's not doing much from an aquatic habitat standpoint. So we created a series of goals that represented ecological goals, social goals about access, equity, and inclusion. Talked about economic goals, as the mayor, you spoke about the importance of this being an economic project, not just an infrastructure project. And then this idea that I sort of joke about each time, which is this warm, fuzzy thing that I can't always describe as a guy, about what human experience is. Like, you go to the lakefront and you watch the sunset go down, whatever that feeling is, that's neat. And so the ability for people to have this lakefront trail that they can experience that and just kind of be proud of where they live is really important. And we heard, I think, at the grand opening for the pier, one of the great quotes was one of the residents who walked up, I think, after the mayor, you were speaking, or and I think the issue came up. He said, I know that I invested in the right place because the community is investing in me. And I don't live along the lake. He lives a few blocks away, and that was a wonderful moment. So hearing their perspectives and integrating them into the goals and objectives so that they can hear their words back and see that we're listening was really important. So this starts a series of slides of fun, but we'll try and make it not quite as dull as it could be. But here's the fun part of this, is that there's a bunch of rules and you got to learn them, right? So on the left hand side, you got this arrow that's going up and down. It says keep that line. Those residents said, that is the top of my bluff today. It will be the top of my bluff tomorrow. The slope, I don't, do whatever you want below that slope, that's fine. But you're not taking more of my backyard, if you will, or my lakefront. So we had to protect and preserve that line. Further back in the image, you can see there's another image where we're actually allowed to pull back sections of the shoreline. There's another line that we're showing here, which is the blue line, which is that filled area and unfilled areas. So these are again some portions of that natural shoreline. A filled area, just because it's been filled out there, doesn't mean that you can actually put your trail, which is not a water dependent use, out at that blue line. You actually have to respect some other lines, which is the next line we're going to show, which is the natural shoreline. So that red line is defined by looking at historic photos, looking at where the shoreline would have naturally eroded, what the erosion rates would have been, and saying this is where it would have been. So again, back to that other line, the blue line, it says where where regulatory is from a federal perspective. From a state perspective, though, they actually care about the red line. And so we have to understand that, because we can't put a trail out in the middle of the lake, as much as that would be cool. Can't do it. There's a permitting complexity associated with that. And so what we ultimately do is we end up with an easement and agreement left of that line, which is, again, the private section of the shoreline. The natural shoreline defines the stuff on the left is privately owned. We have an easement with them. And to the right, we actually have an agreement with the state. There's a lease for a 50-year term that allows us to develop those improvements in the water, because of course I could be standing in that water if I were just a person kayaking or canoeing along the lakefront. We have to lease that. And there's different revenue or different costs associated with lease. For the city, it's about $1 a year. So that's not too bad. But if you're a marina, it's a little bit more expensive.
Thanks, Jason. So after beginning in about 2014, negotiating at first memorandums of understanding with nearly 100 stakeholders, So when we use that term stakeholders, it's not just the people who have the immediate right to the property, but including the residents of the apartment complexes, including the two beach club associations, where of the multiple parcels on the street, there was a shared land, public or private park to their association at the shoreline, that in one case, one association had within their bylaws that they needed 100% of all of their property owners to agree on something in order to enter into any type of agreement, and in particular, of course, these easements, which were for everyone involved, absolutely the first time that we were treading into this territory, right? So so much credit is owed to the people, our residents who worked with us to really, on both sides of the table, build that trust, that the images that we were showing them, the conversations that we were having, really were going to pan out into a project that was going to be mutually beneficial for all. So after starting with those MOUs back in 2014, in 2017, we put pen to paper for our first official easement agreement and submerged land lease, and got that packaged off and sent to the state. And that really put into place for us back in January of 2017, the confidence to move forward with the remaining engineering and permitting that was required on this project. And just a slide or two from now, we'll get into the permitting aspect of this, but really building that public consensus all the way back from 2009, and then starting to really drill down into this map and understand where we needed to either acquire property or take easements over in order to have city managed lands occur throughout this 3/4 mile stretch. So we already had Sims Park pictured here on the east, or on the right side of the screen rather. And then we acquired 4 properties, which are currently being used for mobilization of the contractor in the eastern phase. And after the project is complete, that will become a new public access park. That is the location of our paddlecraft beach you'll see later, and some other great ideas we have for that asset. And you can see kind of along the way, a mix of city-owned property, city-acquired property, and then negotiated easements. What is not represented on this map, and if you can see my cursor, we were able to work with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy as well as the state of Ohio to acquire about 6 acres that will then be permanently conserved and sort of be a natural flow of what exists today as Sims Park into this upland area. And again, if you have the ability to go out and see, it was one of those opportunities that was right underneath our nose. And as the mayor said earlier, the actuality of this project just blew out of the water the drawings that we had. So after years of looking at these drawings, it wasn't until we actually started building the project and climbed up on that bluff, which at the time was under an easement, and said, oh my gosh, we have to have this property. This is just an absolute treasure and really should be part of the public domain. So we were fortunate to acquire that just last year. Takeaways from the public consensus building process. For anyone considering a trail project of this magnitude, or really any public project, getting all of the right people involved. We had, as Jason said, countless public meetings, design charrettes to really get people involved in the process of being creative about what this could look like. Again, we really feel like this is a precedent setting in so many ways, and we came to the table with blank pieces of paper, never telling the community that we had the answers, because we truly didn't. This was really something that came out of partnerships with area residents and owners, real estate agents, developers in the area, who were able to guide us towards some of those economic conversations that we have had and continue to have. And then the big players in all of this, the ones at the regulatory level who were going to give us the permission to do such a massive undertaking along the waterfront. The Army Corps, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, and the EPA. And fortunately, all of those are not only our permitters, but also have been our funders over time. So establishing those relationships has really been key to our success here. And to go back to one of the early slides that the mayor talked about, the overall goals of the project, all throughout, we have been identifying, our top 3 goals. That is always helpful to have that high level overview when you're in the weeds, doing the work on the project, to go back to why, the why of the project. We're here to increase public access to our region's greatest natural asset, far and away, to stabilize the slopes, which in turn stabilizes the property value and the resiliency of our community, and to do so with an additional layer of an environmental lens and an equity lens has been absolutely paramount for us. And then the economic development of it, not only within the project area that you see highlighted here, but for the larger city and the greater region. Over to you, Jason, to talk about project permitting.
So it's complex permitting process, and its complexity is in part just because of the size. But anytime, I think, like Allison, you mentioned, anytime you can engage folks early and often, whether that's residents or regulatory, I think it's pretty critical. I'd forgotten actually until you just ran through that in 2019, we actually had regulatory agencies sitting along the lakefront with us, drawing design concepts and testing ideas, and them saying, no, that's stupid, don't do that. And then we kept going back and forth in residents, and we had a series of discussions about that were really productive. And so we came up with a solution that blends art and engineering, and so really looks at creating the series of nearshore structures that create some opportunity for some habitat, at the same time gives an opportunity for recreational marina development. All these pieces and parts were designed up front and engineered up front, and making sure that we're paying attention to it from a coastal and a civil engineering standpoint, and from a design and aesthetic standpoint was really important to us. The fun of this slide is that we actually spent about 3 months, I think, in the wave tank, which is about the size of a soccer field, with paddles that can direct waves of any size from any direction, and look at how sand moves along the shoreline. How stable are the structures? Did we actually get the design correct? It's built at 1/27th and a half scale. So, you can actually, you get kind of bored. So you got to, stick some people down in the lower right-hand side who are about the right scale to show what the beach might look like. But that beach is just about finished. But the idea of understanding how these structures are influenced. We use a lot of physical modeling as well as numeric modeling, because these are complex things. And so we can actually use this as a regulatory discussion, something we can actually use with residents to explain why we're doing certain types of things. We could test the marina and with and without the marina, and understand what the implications are on the shoreline. So it was a really extensive process. We did that up in Canada, because there's only a few wave tanks that can handle this size of a facility or this size of a construction project.
And Jason, I think it took 18 or 19 months from the time that we had submitted our initial permits, right, to ODNR, to get that full permit. And at this, of course, with the hierarchy of the state and then the federal government, until the state would give us that permit, we then couldn't achieve those permits from the Army Corps. And that was even with so many conversations predating that, right? Like they were on board throughout the process, throughout the planning process. But again, just the magnitude of this, to have a project stretch over 3,000 linear feet. I don't think we would have, we might still be waiting for a permit had we not gone to do this modeling, which really gave us a lot of insight into what is sometimes an unpredictable nature of the shoreline.
Yeah, I think the rocks are colored different colors, so we can see if they move. We have a lot of images to assess that. Look at we can see little flags are determining where the shoreline is, to determine if we run it for really dramatic events, for example. what will the impact of that be? What's a 100-year water level and a 100-year wave event happen? What's a 500-year event on top of that? So we make sure we understand what the implications are, and if there's a failure, it is an unraveling of the whole thing. And one of the key components of this is making sure that if we're going to have a trail, it's usable and it can't be underwater, it can't be destroyed, and it can't be washed away with, so that pink little ribbon is actually something that if you get the chance to walk on the tour this afternoon, you'll get to walk along majority of it, but it's all set relatively high because water depths vary along this whole section of shoreline. So the section in the upper right image is actually probably about 2 to 3 feet. The section on the left image is actually in a section that's about 7 feet deep of water, and the amount of wave height you can get within those is dramatically different.
And I will just add that one of the benefits of having built that trust and that open communication and sort of managing expectations of everyone, we're very much so sharing all of the updates with the property owners and with the larger community. And from, again, a managing expectations standpoint, definitely had questions about, will the trail be pink because of these photos we've seen? So
I forgot about that.
All sorts of questions, managed throughout the process that sometimes it's just kind of funny to look back and reflect upon. So securing funding, I know that's one of the topics that everyone always wants to talk about, and how did you do it? So at this point, in this multi-phased waterfront improvement project that we have, which, as the mayor mentioned early on, included the pier that we built back in 2013 at a cost of about $2 million. The second phase that we're in right now is the 3/4 mile trail. At some point in the future, we may go back to the conversations of building a marina, a transient marina, was something that the community also felt very strongly about a decade ago of starting this process. So overall, at the time that this project began, we talked about it as about a $30 million plus project. We are currently hovering right around the $12.7 million mark just for phase 2. So just for the erosion control and public access trail. Some of the big takeaways: engage funders early. Like I said, we've been fortunate that the regulatory agencies that were permitting this project, the different arms of them, largely also became our funders. Presenting tangible benefits. We have such a multi-layered project that we were able to distill down to essentially 3 large project goals, again, with public access, erosion mitigation, and economic development being those 3. But you have to provide actual metrics for job creations, for shoreline habitat. We have a very strict monitoring process in place that we really need to demonstrate to these funders when you apply for something a couple of years in advance of actually getting those rocks in the water, that what you put down on paper actually has come to fruition, and that there's measurable, tangible results. One of the ways we're able to demonstrate those metrics is by having a trail counter that is on loan to us from the National Park Service, and we're actually able to measure the quantity of users on the trail at all different points throughout the year that it's been up. So that's great. Providing comprehensive solutions. Again, this project just hitting on so many different layers. At the end of the day, all of our grantors want to make sure that they are part of something that is, in fact, providing just an equitable access to Lake Erie, is actually cleaning and improving the health of the waterfront and the lake for all of its users, not just people, but for the 300 plus migratory birds that come through our area every year. And of course, the fish that we want to continue to spawn there, because even from a tourism perspective, fishing is a good industry to have here in the community. Leveraging and mixing the different sources has probably been the biggest opportunity that we have had on this project. And I will say that it is expensive to raise money, especially in the ballpark that we have, and leveraging a federal grant against a state grant can definitely be tricky. Each one has a certain percentage where they require a non-federal match, and the activities have to line up very well with each other in order for that to count as an eligible match. And all of these are reimbursable grants as well for the most part. So it's really outlining the sources all the way down from, your $20,000 and $30,000 grants that have a very narrow focus of what they'd like you to address. For instance, the plantings within some of the biofiltration areas that we have on the project, to the larger allocations that we received from the State Capital Fund or from the Cuyahoga County Casino Revenue Fund that are really sort of higher level, just get the project done for the benefit of the community. Really working with all of those and keeping all your grantors happy has definitely been a learning curve for us, and I think one that we've managed well to date. But I think another big opportunity that I have another slide on here is the Shoreline Special Improvement District that we'll get into. So just to give you a little bit more detail about the current funding sources that we do have, we were the first community outside of Cleveland to receive funding from the Cuyahoga County Casino Revenue Fund, and that was in the magnitude of $4 million. And that was a huge infusion of cash for us and really gave us the ability to kick off the first phase of the overall second phase of this project. We have issued locally over $3.4 million in bond issues. That has been something that is our demonstrated skin in the game when we talk about the match that we've received from FEMA, from some of the state funds. And it really has been we are thankful to our council and all of the constituents that have allowed us to dip into that local funding in order to advance this project. Talking more about firsts, we were the first community to be funded for erosion mitigation from FEMA's Pre-Disaster Hazard Mitigation Fund. That funding award came to us back in 2017, and we were just able to start making use of it in 2020 because of the extensive federal background check, essentially, that's done in terms of environmental assessments and other work that the federal government did, even though we had already done it here locally. So just, again, sort of mindful of the time that these things take. And so grateful to ODNR and their various departments for all of the work that they've done. You really do have to really drill down into the different program areas and what their priorities are, and it changes year to year, whether public access or nearshore health is more important from the coastal perspective, changes annually. And then same thing with the priorities on the fundings for the Clean Ohio Trail funds. And this year, we just received word recently that we are receiving funding in the magnitude of $500,000 from the National Park Service. It's actually a pass-through through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So a federal grant coming through a state office. We've received another allocation from the State Capital Grant for construction, this time for the completion of the project, which has been huge. And then we're grateful to the two groups, one including the Cleveland Foundation, and then one being K&D Management, the apartment property management group I spoke about earlier, giving us the seed money at $500,000 to total to begin a capital campaign that we will publicly launch this summer for everyone in the community to be involved in. I'll just touch briefly on this, the Shoreline Special Improvement District. It may be something that some of you have heard of. It's been in the news lately. And later this afternoon, I know there's actually a webinar separate from this conference, but giving a little bit more background information onto what a Shoreline Special Improvement District is. So it was enabled back in 2019 in Senate Bill 51, and essentially what it does is allows property owners with contiguous properties to finance improvements collectively by adding it to their property tax bill assessment, as opposed to having to pay this cost upfront. So for the waterfront improvement plan, we have not made use of the special improvement district. It wasn't in effect when we were fundraising for this project. It just got incorporated about a month ago. But what it does allow for all future projects, again, sort of hearkening back to this Euclid model, and we'll talk more about that in just a second, what exactly that means. But if we want to continue to take this precedent-setting project and expand it along the shoreline and continue to provide for public access, this is a way to finance it. We feel very fortunate to be able to have sort of cobbled together the different funding sources that we have, but it's probably not sustainable to do this over a larger scale. So the assessment will allow for private property owners who are interested in this type of work to enter into agreements with a bank that has been set up amongst not only Euclid, but 12 other communities in Lake County. Right now, there are no public access projects that are part of the first tranche that's being funded this summer. But I do think it's pretty impressive that there is already $5 million worth of erosion control projects that will be funded this summer using this financing mechanism with a pretty low interest rate and over a 15-year term that runs with the property. So if the current property owner is not the current property owner in 5 years, that assessment is still back on the property. Definitely a more affordable way to address the rapidly eroding shorelines that we have here. And there's definitely opportunity, I think, in the future for this to be a part of the financing and the funding mix for more public access projects. As Jason touched on before, and I just want to reiterate here, there was no exchange of money with the property owners in our current Euclid Waterfront plan. The easements were negotiated without any monetary exchanges. In terms of reaching and setting new goals, I love these drone photos that Smith Group just took, and we've sort of peppered them throughout the slides here. There are it's just so impressive to see when the renders, which were created back in January of 18, actually are becoming the reality. And again, we hope that you'll come down and see the progress that we've made. This phase, this $12.7 million project, will be substantially complete by December of 2021. We are also part of the Lake Erie Water Trail, which has been championed by the Cleveland Metro Parks and is across all of Cuyahoga County. We're the eastern terminus for that. As I mentioned just briefly, plans are underway to design and build that new lakefront park at the eastern trailhead at the location of a future paddlecraft beach, potentially a future lakefront restaurant. And really, to the mayor's point before about economic development, we are so excited to see the private sector also investing in this area. We have seen new construction of residential homes, including 2 that are under contract. One new resident to the city, just signing the paperwork this week on a home right in the project area that went for above asking price. So I'm just really excited to see that. And then, of course, the next steps, the Euclid project as a model. And I'll turn it over to you, Jason, just briefly before we go into the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll summarize it in 1 second. What started out as a dream back in, I can't even tell you what year, because Mayor, you're right. When did this begin? I don't know. I feel like it probably began 20, 30 years ago, but in earnest, really in 2009. And what that means is that this, I mean, you guys are 50,000 people is not a big community, but they're leading the way. And I think it's really impressive. And what I hear continuously is that this is a precedent that's becoming something that is seeking to be replicated throughout the county. So there's 32 miles of shoreline throughout Cuyahoga County. And the county executive has said, let's do this more. Let's do more of this. And so we're right now assessing the entire shoreline, looking for those opportunities, working with public-private partners on a similar type of concept in probably 4 or 5 different areas right now. And so this model that started with a community who said, you know, this little engine that could, and is showing that we can actually solve something and be more resilient and come up with a better solution if we work together collaboratively. And that's what we're really finding. And so it's a beautiful opportunity to lead and in the Great Lakes and show just how being thoughtful and having a consistent leadership and a consistent message, and we can actually be really impactful. So thanks so much for the opportunity to present with the group. I think, Allison, any parting words, or I think we're right on time.
Yeah, I think we're right on the money, and we are going to transition into breakout rooms. Here's the email contact of the mayor, myself, and Jason. If you have follow-up questions, we hope that you can hang out with us in the breakout rooms. And if there's any questions that have come in throughout the conversation, I'm sure Brian will let us know, and we'll get those answered.
We will definitely let you know, and I want to thank Mayor Gale, Allison, Jason. What an amazing presentation. And we have put the link in the chat for the breakout sessions. We've got a couple questions lined up, and we're excited to be there. So that's where we're hopping over next. Thanks, everyone.